I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. If you love to travel, the New York Times' Sebastian Modak has your dream job. He's the 52 places traveler, goes to 52 destinations all over the world in the course of the year, everywhere from Uzbekistan to Norway to ice caves in Canada. He'll tell you all about his travels. June, a big month for the NBA with both championship finals and the draft. The Times is out with a new book called Elevated, The Global Rise of the NBA. Times sportswriter Harvey Araton edited the book, and he's here with the scoop on the hoops. And we begin with the economy and the markets. First quarter GDP strong, corporate profits solid, unemployment at a multi-decade low, but there are plenty of concerns and gloomy warning signs for the economy. President Trump's trade wars, even without a tariff showdown with Mexico, may hit American businesses and consumers hard. The bond market flashing a warning signal. Rates on government bonds falling. Investors rush for a safe haven. Oil prices down sharply since April. That's a sign of fears that the U.S. and global growth is slowing. And last Friday's employment report, with the U.S. adding far fewer jobs than expected in May, another sign of a possible slowdown. So will the Fed ride to the rescue with a cut in interest rates? We're joined by Stephen Grosser, the editor of the New York Times Deal Book, and Matt Phillips, a markets reporter for the Times. Last week, we thought we had a tariff agreement or no tariff agreement with Mexico, an immigration agreement. The president pulled it out of his pocket, quickly pulled it back. What kind of impact is that going to have, and where are we on the tariffs with China? And if that agreement falls through and the president imposes more tariffs, what impact is that going to have on the economy and on the markets?
You want to take this? Or? I think right now what you're seeing is the markets are very much, the stock market is very much in a wait and see mode. They're wanting to see, at the G20 meeting, if China and the US can get back on track with talks and move toward a deal. And if they can't, I think that's, the markets are hoping for that will cause the Fed to step in July and cut rates. And that would be, that's what the market's hoping for, a rate cut.
Absolutely. The market is definitely banking on a big move towards rate cutting from the Federal Reserve that could hopefully buttress stocks, and it would justify some of the real downturn that we've seen in bond yields over the last month.
How far can the Fed cut the rate, and how much impact is that going to have?
Well, there's not as much room to cut as you might expect in a traditional environment. I mean, there's only about 2.5 percentage points till they hit what they call the zero bound, which is essentially when you can't cut anymore. Although there have been experiments, especially in Europe, about negative interest rates, so a different approach to try to force money into the economy, effectively charging people for the privilege of lending money.
If you look at the bond market right now, it's expecting about 3 rate cuts in the next year. So they're looking at a significant move by the Fed to sort of bolster the economy.
And what will that do to people's savings and things like that, and mortgage rates?
Well, mortgage rates have already come down quite a bit. They kind of trade more in line with the longer-term Treasury bond market. So, the 30-year conventional mortgage was around 5%. Or at the back in January. It's down. I think the latest numbers I saw today were 3.82%. So there's been a rush to refinance. There's been a really sort of a mini boomlet in refinancing. So there are real effects on this on people's lives.
What about the impact of tariffs and the trade wars on corporate profits so far? When is that going to hit?
That's, I think, the big question. I don't think, companies are very sure of this. I don't think the analysts who cover those companies are very sure of that. And partly that's because what has gone into effect so far has been relatively, small. And it's really, the fears are that they go through with all the tariffs that have been threatened, and that could be a concern. So that makes it sort of a hard kind of, gauge for a company to figure out what the cost is. And the other thing is, it's not just the direct cost of the tariffs to a company's, revenue and earnings. Right now, and especially in a slow growth environment, an economy that's growing slowly, the change in sentiment, from business executives to consumers, that can really weigh on an economy. And if the company's sales start coming down with their profit margins already high, they have very little room to sort of play with, their earnings. And that could mean, cutbacks in investing, layoffs, and things like that.
The tariff's going to come out of corporate profits or out of our pockets?
Most economists say it's a combination of both. I mean, if the companies can pass it along, you bet they're going to try. If they can't, they'll have to eat a smaller profit margin than they were used to before.
At least before we had tankers burning in the Middle East, oil prices dropping. What does that signal, and how much longer is that going to go on?
Well, prices are down about 20% from their peak in late April. Most analysts interpret that to mean that the investing public is a little bit more dour about the outlook for economic growth globally. There's a ton of supply of oil, and this is going to be, it's a main feed into a lot of different product costs. I mean, gasoline prices are down about 6% from last year. So this is one of the things that could help consumers if there is an increase in prices due to the tariffs.
And what does this mean politically for the Fed? If it doesn't cut rates, it takes a big economic risk. If it does, politically, it looks like it's caving into the president. Does it ignore that, or does it just do whatever it considers the right thing?
I think the Fed needs to do and I think it will do what it considers to be the right thing. And I think if you look at it right now, the question is, the Fed has set it up, and market expectations have been set up that we're expecting a cut, and also a couple cuts after that. If the U.S. looks like it's about to strike a deal with China later this month, what does that do? Does that change the equation on the rate cut that the markets were anticipating and hoping for? And does that mean there could be a sort of a pullback on the good news of getting a trade deal? And I think that's the big question right now regarding the Fed.
The stock market strong, the bond market jittery. How do we reconcile those two things?
Well, I mean, I think, we have to remember the stocks are up about 15% this year. So even though we had quite a pullback in May, I think a little bit around 6% or so, we've really bounced back on the expectations for the Fed. I mean, I think that the bond prices, which have been bond yields and prices move in opposite directions. So yields have been coming down because people have been buying bonds, pushing prices up. They've also been buying stocks this year. And one way to read that is just both assets benefit from a Fed that's cutting rates.
Right, and I would say the bond market has moved, especially in expectations of the Fed cutting rates. And the other thing is low yields on bonds are good for the stock. It makes the yield on stocks and the attractiveness of investing in stocks better.
Any guess?
People go into it.
Any guess what that first rate cut will be?
If they do it in July, depending on the trade deal, but the market seems to be betting on a quarter-point cut in July. I think that's the expectation we're getting.
Thanks to Matt Phillips and Stephen Grosser of the New York Times. And coming up next, he roams the world, brings New York Times readers amazing stories from amazing places. The 52-place traveler will land right here in a minute. Sebastian Modak is the very definition of a road warrior. He's the 2019 52 Places traveler for the New York Times. That means he'll go everywhere this year, from China to Gambia to the Tatra Mountains in Slovakia, even walking the length of Manhattan. Talk about jet lag. So where he's been and where has he been and where he's going, the answer is just about everywhere. And when he started this mission, he said the hardest part of the trip is going to be the abrupt end to any stability or normalcy. He's lived in Manhattan 5 years, which is just about the longest he's lived anywhere. Has that in fact turned out to be the hardest part?
It was the hardest part, but it's also been very interesting how quickly I've transitioned to a new normal. I think it was a matter of months before everything started feeling pretty normal. Just getting on planes, getting off planes, turning around pieces really quickly. So it's interesting how quickly we can adapt to new circumstances.
And also, Sebastian, you said that the question you'll probably be asking most is, where am I? Has that turned out to be true?
That has literally happened a few times where I've woken up in a hotel room and it's taken me maybe 2 to 3 minutes to really figure out where I was. So it's literally happened, and of course existentially it happens every day I'm on the road.
What's been the toughest part of this assignment, assuming there's been any tough part?
I think the toughest part has been not to get carried away and then burnt out immediately. The toughest part has been giving myself time to, live in the experience, but also relax. And, I took maybe one of my first days off a few weeks ago where I just didn't do anything. I stayed in my hotel room, I watched TV, and it was glorious. So I think I need to do more of that. I think it's easy to get carried away when you're meeting such amazing people in such amazing places. But, there's still over 6 months to go, so burnout is definitely a threat.
Now, most people don't travel at that kind of pace or have that many places to choose from. What's your advice for a, more normal pace of traveler?
I think there's a lot of lessons that can be taken away from this, even for someone who's traveling, at a more human pace. And one of those is just being super open to everything. One of my takeaways that I've been telling people when they've asked me about safety and things like that is that everyone kind of needs to know their own risk threshold. Mine, I think, is maybe a little higher than some people because I just like to put myself out there to try to, because it leads to amazing experiences that are worth telling stories about. But I think taking some of that psychology, being like, okay, I'm only in a place for 5 days. Maybe a normal person would be there for 2 weeks. But if you take some of that psychology where you're like, okay, where's the story here? That's going to lead to experiences that you're going to never forget. So really just like putting yourself out there, of course, making sure you're comfortable, but putting yourself out there and seeing what happens with strangers, with new experiences, with new places, I think is one of the biggest lessons I think other people can take from this.
You're about halfway through the year. Are there places next year, the year after, you'd love to go back to?
There's a place that has unfortunately looks like it's being cut from the list, which is Iran, because of the current situation. There's safety concerns, and that's even if they were to give me a visa, which seems unlikely right now. And that was one of the places I was most excited about going. So that's definitely on my list in the next few years if I can make it happen.
What about the ones you've been to so far?
Places I'd like to go back
to?
There's so many. There's ones that I don't think are very surprising to me, like Uzbekistan. I had actually the longest I spent anywhere was Uzbekistan. It was almost 2 weeks.
What made it so exciting?
It was just so brand new to me. And I think to a lot of travelers because it was so closed off for so long. And there's just such a rich history. There's a lot of culture that hasn't been watered down by mass tourism yet. It's still very, I hate the word authentic, but it is still very as it was in a way. That culture that people have passed down. And I just left being like, there's so much more to see here. So that's one place that I'd really love to get back to.
But that is an interesting word. Considering we live in a virtual world now, we can see everything. We can see everything in virtual reality. Why do people travel anymore at all? Especially with going through airport security and packing and all of that hassle. Why do we bother?
I think it's the people. I really think it's the people. None of these places would have been worth writing about if I hadn't met anyone, And I've just been blown away by the kindness of strangers. I've depended on the kindness of strangers every single day for the past 6 months. And it's really showed me, in a time where I think some people are more afraid of the rest of the world than ever, it's shown me that more people out there are good than are bad. And if you enter a conversation or a relationship with good intentions and positivity, you're just going to get that in return. And I've trusted my life, to so many strangers, and it's only led to amazing experiences.
Some of the contrast must be amazing, say, between Bulgaria and Norway.
Yeah, no, it's been, like I said, it's really hard to sometimes stay present in a moment because it is that pace and those quick transitions are just happen so quickly that I'm just like, okay, where's the story? How do I, But I've been getting better at it, and I think that that is an example of a kind of a very drastic transition. There was also, I went straight from Doha, Qatar, which is this ultra modern mega city that they're still building, to Uzbekistan. It couldn't be more different.
Do you tell people that you're from the Times, or do you go not pretending, but as a average tourist?
I don't tell like hotels, or as much as I can, I don't tell restaurants that I'm from the Times. Sometimes if I want to quote somebody or something, I have to tell them eventually. In terms of regular conversations with people, I'll meet a lot of strangers, at bars, at restaurants, on subways, whatever else. And I find that I try to keep it quiet as long as possible, because making that genuine connection first is going to lead to so much, more rewarding experiences than saying like, hi, I'm from the Times, can you show me around? Because then there's an agenda involved. So I try to make a genuine connection first. And then, if I want to quote somebody or if, something like that, then I'll tell them, by the way, I'm writing a piece, can I quote that amazing thing you said about Aberdeen, Scotland?
And very quickly, for someone who lives in Manhattan, on your visit here, did you find anything that surprised you?
Well, I had never done what I did, which was pretty much walk the entire length of Manhattan. So I found a lot that surprised me. When you see it that way, in that context, see the transition from neighborhood to neighborhood, I think you just gain a better understanding. And if you find a nice spring day like I had, I'd recommend doing that to anyone.
That's great. Well, have a good rest of the year, a good more trips to Sebastian Modak, our 52-week traveler. And coming up straight ahead, the NBA has become a global sports and marketing phenomenon. New York Times sports writer Harvey Araton will tell you all about the worldwide rise. Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, they are all more than NBA superstars, past and present. They are marketing powerhouses and global brands. Their status is a sign of the NBA's worldwide success. Last season, NBA programming reached over 1 billion unique viewers. 35% of visitors to the league's website came from outside of North America. The New York Times is out with a terrific new book, Elevated: The Global Rise of the NBA. It's edited by legendary Times sports writer Harvey Araton, who's not only covered the NBA, but 10 Olympics, as well as Super Bowls and World Series. Harvey, how'd you get the idea for this book, which has our own superstars in it, including Dave Anderson, Dan Barry, Mike Powell, Liz Robbins, Richard Sandomir, and plenty of others?
Well, it struck me as I was kind of finishing up my full-time run at the Times in 2016 that the people I had covered the NBA with, all the colleagues I'd have had across the years, were tremendous writers and people, and many of them had spent some time at the Times and then moved on to become star reporters and writers at other publications, whether Howard Beck, Jonathan Abrams, Selena Roberts, Mike Wise. The list went on, and I thought, well, with the quality of the staff we'd had over the course of the 40 some odd years, which was the time period I was thinking about, from the late 70s through last season, I thought there must be a heck of a lot of really good material to tell the story of the NBA's global rise.
Now, you dedicated this book, this is almost heresy, to an editor. How come? Jay Schreiber.
Well, Jay Schreiber and I go way back to our daily news days. He was an editor there when I was there in the late 80s. And we were on strike together for five and a half months.
That's a bonding experience.
1991, long strike. And then after I moved over to the Times in 91, Jay arrived maybe 3 or 4 months later. He also happens to live around the corner from me. So Jay and I have a very, very strong relationship, but Jay has been the quintessential team sports editor at the Times for many years. And so the dedication to Jay was to Jay Schreiber, who drove us crazy, which he did, but steered us right. And Jake got quite a kick out of that.
Probably the best kind of an editor. Now, you must have started covering sports when you were a teenager, but you talk about the fact that the game has changed a lot in all those years. In what way has it changed?
Well, the whole look of the game has changed. I mean, it's interesting. When I was doing the research for this book, I went back and looked at the box score of a game that I covered in the mid-'80s when Bernard King scored 60 points at Madison Square Garden against the then New Jersey Nets on Christmas night. And he scored those 60 points without taking a single three-point shot. And in that entire game, only 5 three-point shots were taken. You fast forward to today's NBA, and you may get 20 some odd three-point shots taken in a single quarter. So the look and the whole feel of the game has opened up. It's become much more offensive-minded, which is not the first time. These things tend to be cyclical. Of course, we had in the 90s those old Knicks-Miami, essentially they were rugby scrums where the scores were 71-67. So the look and feel of the game has changed quite a bit. But one thing that really has been, I think, very consistent with the NBA is its star-making vehicle. I mean, the sport has always been, it is an incredibly, exciting team sport. And the best teams are the ones that play together as teams. But yet, the very best players are 1 in 5. And, the influence that they have on the outcome of games and on seasons is tremendous. So that hasn't changed from the days of Wilt and Bill Russell to the days now of LeBron and Kevin Durant.
You point out that children of a certain age may have a hard time remembering when the Knicks were consistently in the playoffs. What happened to the Knicks?
Well, I think, they had a good run. They never quite made it over the top in the 90s during what we consider the Patrick Ewing era, when they had Pat Riley as coach and then later Jeff Van Gundy. It was a team with a very strong physical identity, and they were a great contender with a puncher's chance against the Michael Jordan Bulls. They just didn't quite have the star quality or the second star with Ewing to go along to beat the Bulls. But they were a very entertaining team. Then at the end of that era, as Ewing got old and then wanted a trade and was traded, I believe right after the turn of the century, the Jim Dolan era began at the Garden. And just a series of overreaches and meddling and poor decisions and no continuity in the front office has just led to one miserable season after another. Not just a team that has essentially been unable to get out of its own way, but also a lot of unlikable players on those teams. So people they're trying to reset it again, and hopefully build with young players and perhaps a free agent or two this summer. But it's been quite a process, and they have a long way to go.
Harvey Araton, the book is Elevated from the New York Times, and I'll add my thoughts coming up next on CODA. Don't be surprised if you receive a census form this week. The 2020 census is still 10 months away, but the government is sending out 500,000 questionnaires as a test. Will asking whether you're a citizen of the United States reduce the number of responses? Half the households that receive the form this week will be asked that question. The other half will not. It's not a demographer's game. The Supreme Court will decide this month whether the question can be included on the official 2020 census forms next April. When the first national census was authorized in New York, the criteria for counting were simple: every resident, not every citizen. Even so, President Washington assumed the population was undercounted. He figured that some Americans feared that identifying themselves would subject them to taxation. This time, the Trump administration seems to be seeking an undercount. The White House claims that asking about citizenship will help the government enforce the Voting Rights Act. But states like New York warn that the question will intimidate Black, Hispanic, and immigrant populations from responding. And as the Times reported recently, that's precisely what motivated a Republican political strategist when he proposed that the citizenship question be included. Fewer responses from Black, Hispanic, and immigrant Americans will mean less representation from their states in Congress and their cities in legislatures. Also, less targeted federal aid. New York is already poised to lose at least one congressional seat after reapportionment. Residents of no other state pay more to Washington compared to what they get back from the federal government. Now the White House is refusing to tell Congress what's the real reason the census is asking us whether we're citizens. Doesn't good citizenship demand that the president answer Congress first? For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.